Vicki Collins is an English professor at Oregon State University, and she tells about an experience she had with a teacher in high school that changed her life. Collins said that the classroom in which her teacher taught faced out toward a major street. Keeping the attention of high school students was difficult enough, but the traffic noise outside was a constant distraction, especially the sound of emergency vehicles when they would pass by. At some point in nearly every class, this teacher would complain about the intrusion of the sounds of the traffic. But then one Monday, this teacher greeted his class at the beginning as he usually did. This day, however, he said that he wanted to apologize to his students. He told them that over the weekend his wife had had a medical emergency. He called 911, and the response of the ambulance and the paramedics most likely saved his wife's life as well as the life of their unborn child. He said to his students, "I need to apologize because all this time I was listening to the noise instead of thinking about the lives." And then turning toward the woman, Jesus said to Simon, "Do you see this woman?" Simon does not answer this question, nor does Jesus comment on his non-answer. The fact, of course, is that yes, Simon sees this woman. She is, after all, causing a huge scene, weeping and wailing in the middle of his dinner party. But the truth is also, no, he does not see her. He sees her not as an equal, nor as a child of God, nor does he see the life she represents. He sees the interruption. He does not see the person. He hears the noise, but he does not think about the life. Now, the very fact that Jesus and Simon are standing together in Simon's dining room is worthy of comment. Simon is, after all, a Pharisee. That means he belongs to an organization of righteous Jewish men who are passionate about protecting and enforcing all 613 commands of the Hebrew Scriptures. They regard disobedience to God's law as the cause of Israel's past and present suffering. And they are determined, insofar as it depends on them, to protect the people from God's future wrath by enforcing the highest standards of morality and decency. They are determined to keep their nation pure. Therefore, assuming God favors purity over mercy, they will keep Israel pleasing in God's sight. That's their objective. Now, reading the New Testament, it is easy to come to the conclusion that Jesus opposed and was opposed by the Jewish religious establishment. Sadly, this easy conclusion has been generalized, has been extrapolated through the centuries to justify anti-Semitism and to rationalize violence and discrimination against the Jewish people. I don't have to tell you how wrong and how harmful to the witness of Jesus Christ this whitewashing of Christian prejudice has been. But there is another conclusion which is just as easy to draw, and that is to say that the Pharisees were the enemies of Jesus. And this also is not the case. The Pharisees are not the enemies of Jesus. The Gospels show us that there were Pharisees who were very interested, genuinely interested in what Jesus was doing. They were men who longed for the renewal of Israel's faith and the recovery of their nation's spiritual center. They were earnest in their questions and initially at least seemed hopeful that Jesus might indeed be their Messiah. Or failing that, that Jesus might at least be a prophet sent from God. 3 times in the Gospel of Luke, 3 times Pharisees invite Jesus into their homes, not to trick him, not to trap him, but to have him as their guests and to learn from him. This is indisputably the case in our scripture for this morning. Simon has invited Jesus to his home. He has invited him to share a meal, which means that he accepts Jesus. He accepts Jesus as an honored and respected guest. That's how things went in his culture. You didn't have someone as your guest. You did not break bread with them unless you were willing to accept them and to count yourselves among them. So it is clear. It's clear as our scripture unfolds that Simon, in fact, suspects that Jesus is a prophet, at least, that he does, in fact, speak for God. But while Simon is busy being the all-important host at the dinner for this visiting rabbi, someone uninvited slips into the house. It is a woman, a dishonorable woman, a sinful woman, a woman who is known and is notorious throughout the city. The Bible never tells us her name, nor do we ever learn what it is that she has done that is so outrageous, so despicable that her entire city knows about it. We do not know who she is or what she has done, but that has not deterred Christians through the centuries from assuming that they know things about her. As early as the 2nd century AD, Christian writers and preachers were convinced that she was a prostitute. They were certain that her sin was sexual. They garnered this opinion based on the facts that she brazenly enters a room full of men, that she bends down over Jesus, that she dared to touch a man who was not her husband, that she anoints him with perfumed oil, that she lets her hair down, that she is described as a woman of the city. Christians through the ages have imagined her as a degenerate and yet somehow raven-haired beauty. But that may not be the case. Women in her culture sometimes let their hair down as a sign of grief, to show that their hearts were broken and that they were in mourning, or as a sign of great remorse. And the term woman of the city could just as easily be translated a woman known throughout the city. She could have been the daughter of a prominent citizen. She could have been the woman who always filled your coffee cup at the diner and knew your order before you walked in the door. Could as easily be. What's more, the Gospel of Luke clearly identifies this woman as a sinner. And if you know anything about sin, then you know that the long-term consequences of sin are not attractive. Lutheran pastor Debbie Blue invites us to picture this woman not as a raven-haired beauty, but as a woman with hard, bitter features. Perhaps her skin is weathered and rough. Perhaps her stare is icy and hard. Perhaps her mouth is forever twisted into a flinty snarl. Perhaps none of us would want this woman touching us. Pastor Blue suggests that this woman's sin might not be sexual, but that perhaps she is simply mean, vindictive, injured, or spiteful. Perhaps she is just impossible to please, never happy about anything, to the point that she has driven her children away. Perhaps she is narcissistic, selfish, demanding, and unreasonable, concerned only about herself, manipulating the people around her like pawns to get whatever it is she thinks is best for her. Perhaps she is so deeply insecure and wounded that she drives everyone away from her before they can have a chance to fail her. Perhaps that's the defense mechanism she has developed and adopted. maybe, since this is occupied territory, maybe she is collaborating with the Roman forces, and her fellow citizens suspect that she is a traitor and a spy. The truth is, we just don't know. And the truth is also that the Gospel of Luke isn't about to tell us. Often this is the genius of Luke's narrative. He leaves things open. She could be any of us. She could be you. But Simon believes that he knows all that he needs to know about this woman. He is sure that he knows all that he needs to know about her, and he believes that he knows all that God needs to know about her as well. If this man really was the prophet I thought he was, Simon mutters to himself, then he would know just who and what kind of woman this is who is touching him, that she is a sinner. To Simon's way of thinking, this is the litmus test for a prophet. A prophet would surely know the heart of a person like this and would recoil in revulsion. But Simon is in for a surprise. Jesus demonstrates that he is more than a prophet as he reads Simon's thoughts and demonstrates that he knows the character of Simon's heart. And as he goes on to do something that no prophet ever had been given the authority to do previously, Jesus declares that sins are forgiven. Still, I have some compassion for Simon. After all, this woman has interrupted his dinner party and made a huge scene. In his novel, The Good News from North Haven, author Michael Lindvall says of one of his characters, Elma was real emotional, which was not a testimony to the depth of her feelings, so much as it was a critical comment of her inability to control them. Well, it sounds like it could be said of the woman in our scripture, at least the way that Simon thinks of her. So when this woman comes running in and she throws herself at Jesus' feet and starts sobbing, I'm uncomfortable too. I'm uncomfortable for her. I'm uncomfortable for Simon. I'm thinking, do we really need all of this? This drama. I mean, is a little decorum too much to ask? Honey, please, you're making a scene. Here. I've got some Kleenex. I'm sure I do somewhere. Oh, here. Just take a deep breath. Breathe in, breathe out. You know, there are some really wonderful antidepressants available now. Maybe you want to talk to your doctor about... Oh my. But this woman knows. She knows that the person to go to when your life is a wreck and you can't put the pieces back together and you don't know where else to go, the person to go to is Jesus. Oh, I love that you beat me there. Oh, it makes my heart so glad. Of course, the person to go to is Jesus, and so that's exactly what she does. Or perhaps more accurately, what I should say is that is exactly what she has done. The fact that she comes bearing an alabaster jar of fine ointment suggests that she and Jesus have met previously. It suggests that they have a relationship, and now she has come to honor him with this great show of love. But what has Jesus done for her? Again, we don't know, but we can make some guesses. Based on what's been going on in Luke 6 and 7, perhaps he has healed her, or perhaps he has healed her child. Maybe he told her the truth about her own life in a way that opened her eyes. Maybe he showed her what would happen if she continued on the road that she was on. Maybe he told her that she was not responsible for the abuse she had suffered at the hands of others. What good news that can be. To understand at last that your abuse belongs to your abusers and not to you. Wow. Maybe he stopped her from taking her own life. Maybe he told her that it was not too late to start repairing the relationships that she had poisoned. Maybe he dared to suggest to her that all was not lost. That just because things were bad now didn't mean they always had to be that way. Maybe he reminded her that God is more interested in her future than in her past. Maybe he showed her that God is loving and merciful and not at all like the angry, vengeful God of the people who refused to see her for who she is. Whatever the case may be, Jesus seems fully aware of who she is and what kind of shape her soul is in, and he is not shocked, he's not alarmed, he's not condemning, he's not judgmental, he's not condescending, he's not holier than thou. He does not recoil from her touch. He does not say anything about loving the sinner and hating the sin. He does not try to distance himself from her, and he certainly does not send her away. He does not refer her to any of the agencies in her community who are very good at sheltering and rehabilitating women like herself. In fact, Jesus lets her close enough to touch him. I'm thinking touch here physically, emotionally, spiritually. He lets her get so close to him that it makes everyone else in the room uncomfortable. Because nobody ever got saved from a distance. Forgiveness, grace, and mercy are messy and difficult, and nobody ever got saved from a safe distance. If you're going to be part of the saving work of Jesus, you're going to have to get in there and get close. But such proximity is offensive to those who value respectability over redemption. Jesus senses Simon's discomfort with all of this, and so Jesus says to him, "Simon, I have something to say to you." And Simon replies, "Teacher, speak," which was probably a mistake. He probably shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't have called Jesus teacher, because if you ask him to teach you, he's just liable to do it. School is in session. Jesus said to Simon, "Now there was a certain creditor who had 2 debtors. One owed 5,000 pieces of silver, ballpark $50,000. The other 50, or about $5,000. Substantial, but When they both could not pay, the creditor forgave the debts of both of them. Now, which do you think will love him more?" Simon answered, "Well, I suppose," come on, Simon, you know the answer to this. "I suppose the one for whom he canceled the greater debt will have the greater love." Jesus said to him, "You have judged rightly." And then turning to the woman, Jesus said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? When I entered your house, you gave me no water for my feet, but she has bathed my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair." Ick. "You gave me no kiss of greeting, but from the time I came in, she has not stopped kissing my feet. You provided me nothing for freshening up, but she has soothed my weary feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, it should be obvious to you, Simon the Pharisee, that her sins, which were many, have been forgiven. Hence she now shows great love. For the one for whom little is forgiven loves little." Now, we never find out if Simon learns the lesson that Jesus is trying to teach him. But even if he fails to grasp the point, I want to be sure that we understand it. There are 2 debtors in this parable. The implication is clear that Simon is a debtor too. 2 debtors in the parable, 2 debtors in the room that day. Simon is a debtor, no one is without sin. And comparing our relative sinfulness, that is, trying to look at others and figure out, oh, whose sin is worse and whose is not so bad, and at least I'm not like, oh, that is a recipe for spiritual disaster. Jesus is trying to be clear. Simon is a sinner too, and he has no right to judge this woman. What's more, both of the debtors in the parable that Jesus tells, and hence both Simon and the woman in the room, are unable to pay what they owe. None of us can fully atone for all the ways that we fall short of what God intends for us. But the good news is that our debts are canceled, that the slate is wiped clean, we are forgiven. The forgiveness that we receive has nothing to do with us and everything to do with the God who desires our reconciliation, desires our redemption. Clearly, there is no room here for anyone to think that they are more virtuous than another, or that their sins are less of a burden before God. Clearly, there is no room for anyone to think that they are righteous while others are not. What Jesus is saying is that forgiveness is a gift. It is something we receive, not something we earn. And what Jesus is saying is that it is forgiveness that engenders love and not the other way around. What I mean by that is that God's forgiveness provides the shelter within which our love for God may grow. We are not forgiven because some of us have somehow succeeded in making ourselves lovable, presentable, better than we were. I mean, good on you if you have, but it doesn't matter. Rather, we grow to love because God first provides the grace, provides the mercy, the forgiveness, which makes our love possible. I should point out here that this is often the way it works in human relationships too. Very often when we have been hurt or harmed or pushed aside or insulted or shamed, if we wait for the person who has wounded us to come to their senses and come to us with an apology, if we wait for them to make the first move, then we're quite likely to be waiting for a lifetime and beyond. Very often we who have been hurt have to take the first step. We have to offer unmerited forgiveness, just like God does. And when we do, when we imitate God in this way, we often find that our forgiveness acts like a shelter, reaching out and making the remorse, the redemption, the healing of our adversary possible. Now, there's something else really important and unexpected going on here. Not only are there two sinners in this story, there are also two hosts. The literal host at the dinner, Simon, ends up eyeing Jesus suspiciously, leading him to doubt that Jesus is who he claims to be. But this woman's perception of Jesus leads her to extend to Jesus a generous hospitality that his actual host has not. And in doing so, she is showing that seeing Jesus for who he really is and trusting Jesus to be Jesus for you results in great love that spills over in gratitude and generosity. She becomes the true host at this dinner. There's one other thing. When the woman who has come to Jesus wets his feet with her tears, when she kisses him, when she anoints him, she is not simply doing what Simon would not. There is a sense in which she is atoning for Simon's sin. She is making up for his deficiency. She is putting right what he has done wrong. She may be loud, dramatic, and embarrassing, but she, like God, is doing for Simon what he apparently is unwilling or unable to do for himself. And in that sense, I think we could make a pretty good case that she is more than a prophet, too. Jesus' question to his host was, Simon, do you see this woman? But the problem here is not that Simon does not see her for who she is. The problem is that Simon does not see himself for who he is either. The problem is that Simon does not imagine that he also needs God's forgiveness. Simon is not counting on needing anybody's mercy. Doesn't think he needs anybody's forgiveness or anybody's grace. And this arrogance is his own deepest failing. This is his besetting sin. But this is the great truth of being saved by grace. We don't earn it. We can't deserve it. We can't achieve it or plan for it or get it on our own. It comes to us precisely because of our need and God's goodness. And more often than not, it comes to us in the last place and from the last hands that we would ever expect to find it. And now you know.